At the end of my video about the recent Artist Soapbox Derby, I mentioned helping my mentor Don Pott build his car for the first race back in 1975. Don Pott made quite a splash in the art world in the early 70s. His best-known work was a series of 4 car-like sculptures that were shown around the world. The first one had an air-cooled engine from a drone and was radio-controlled. There's a link in the description that shows this incredible sculpture in action. Don built 3 more sculptures with this theme, each one unique. One was made with an elegant wooden chassis. One was fitted with fabric airfoil shapes, anticipating the aero components later used with Grand Prix cars. The last one had a series of stainless steel airfoils, connected by a linkage system that moved them in unison. I was so inspired by Don Pott's unique vision. I received my bachelor's degree in art from San Jose State University in 1971, but when I learned that Pott was teaching there, I quickly decided to return and study with him. I registered for a graduate seminar in sculpture that Pott was teaching, and on the first day of class he casually mentioned that he'd just been invited to build an entry for the first Artist Soapbox Derby sponsored by the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. After class, I, along with several other students, approached Pott, saying that we'd love to be involved in the project. Don appreciated the offers for help, but as he explained, his studio was in Marin County, about 2 hours away from the school, and he couldn't imagine students coming to his studio on a regular basis. The art department at San Jose State didn't have a TIG welder, a lathe, or a milling machine, which would be required to build the car that he envisioned. I told Don that my studio was about 15 minutes away from the school and that I had all the space and equipment required, and I emphasized what an honor it would be if we students could help with the project. After giving it some thought, Don said he'd come by my studio after class the next week to check it out. When Don came by the next week, he saw that everything was in place to build the car there, so we quickly devised a plan. We would do the rough layout of the chassis at the school the following week, and then meet at my studio after that. The car would be a 3-wheeler. It would use bicycle wheels with 1 outrigger. Don would be suspended inside the oval chassis, resting on his side, and there would be a smoked plastic shield covering his body opposite the outrigger. We were dazzled by the thrilling design. The plan worked like a charm, and one of the team members had some experience with bicycles, so he went to work building the wheels. Another team member, Steve Kaiser, was a talented photographer, and he documented the construction. I was the only welder on the team, but the other members helped a lot with the cutting and bending of the tubing, and the car steadily progressed. Both the front and rear wheels were mounted in forks to provide the steering, and since they had a lot of caster, they leaned aggressively as they turned. At this point, Don thought it would be cool if the outrigger wheel could lean in compliance, so I got to design and build the linkage system that tied all the wheels together. It works like a charm. We made a form from plywood for forming the acrylic shield, and Don had a connection with the company that did the heating and blow forming of the 1/4-inch acrylic sheet. The chassis was designed to be a very snug fit against Don's body, and getting him in and out of the car had to be choreographed. First, the plastic shield was removed, then the car was rolled over onto a blanket, outrigger wheel pointing straight up. One of the diagonal chassis elements was hinged, so it could be swung out of the way to provide an opening large enough for him to wiggle into the chassis. Don's body was suspended with 3 belts, one at his chest, one at his hips, and one near his ankles. The chassis member was hinged back and fastened with a screw, essentially holding him captive. Then the car was rotated back onto its wheels, the shield was reinstalled, and the car was ready to run. We got the car completed about a week before the race. We took it to the school and gave an unannounced demonstration in the quad behind the art building. A huge crowd assembled, and we pushed Don as he made arcing turns left and right. Everything seemed to be working fine. Don thought it might be a good idea to take the car up to the actual race course in McLaren Park in San Francisco and give it a trial run down the hill. When we got there, we learned that the road had a mild turn to the right mid-course, but a pretty sharp left turn at the bottom. Since the outrigger was on the left side, it was very stable for turns to the right, but it could be iffy for a fast left turn. Don wanted to run fast, so we decided to leave the plastic shield off for the trial run just in case. We got Don fitted into the car and gingerly shoved him off. The car started picking up speed quickly on the slope. He navigated the right-hand turn with no problem, but when he got to the bottom of the hill, the sweeping left-hand turn flipped the car up on its side and it skidded for some distance before coming to a stop. Fortunately, the network of stainless tubing on the right side protected Don from injury. Although the tubing was gouged, no structural damage was done. But we had to find a solution to this major problem in less than a week. After some serious thought, Don had a flash of insight. He said, "I know. Let's cast up a big lead weight, maybe 50 pounds, and just before the run, we'll bolt it on right next to the outrigger. That should work, don't you think?" It seemed like a decent idea, but there was barely enough time to source the lead and mount it to the outrigger, and we didn't have time to test it. The day of the race was magical. About 60 artists built cars. Some were whimsical, some funky, some elegant, but everyone was extremely imaginative. We had a great time viewing the other cars and watching them run. Most worked well, but there were a few crashes. Don's run was scheduled near the end of the day, and the crowd control was somewhat lax, and people crowded farther and farther onto the road, giving the cars a more constricted path to navigate. As Don's run neared, our team went into action. We removed the shield, laid down a blanket, rolled the car up on its side, and hinged open the chassis. Don wiggled into place, we fastened him in with our belts, and screwed the chassis member back into place. Then the car was rolled back onto its wheels, and the shield was refitted. Last, we bolted the heavy lead weight into place. At this point, nearly half the roadway was filled with people, and we knew that if the car crashed, it would cause some serious damage. Nevertheless, Don was determined to make a fast, clean run, and when he got the go signal, he was off and running. Everyone on the crew was extremely anxious. We watched him roll down the hill, steadily building speed. He loped through the right-hand turn in the middle of the course, then zoomed down toward the treacherous narrow left sweeper. With our hearts in our throats and our necks craning, we watched him navigate the final corner. Fast, flat, and true. The crowd went crazy. We ran to the bottom of the hill to get Don out of the car. He was grinning from ear to ear, and we all knew this would be an event we'd never forget. What a day it was. Don later described the run this way.
And I started to go down the hill, and I can only remember at the bottom the car getting liquid. And then I felt this incredible centrifugal force throwing me against the plastic canopy. I think it's one of the nicest pieces I've ever did. It's one of the most fantastic aesthetic returns I've ever gotten. It turned out to be a performance piece.
Amanda Pope made a great film about the 1975 race, which is now on YouTube. There's a link in the description, and you can actually see the car run and hear Don describe the construction. There's an interesting epilogue to this story. The Sheldon Museum of Art at the University of Nebraska bought the sculpture, and Don gave some of the proceeds to each crew member. While getting some money was certainly appreciated, the opportunity to work closely with the world-class artist was priceless. That remains one of my most treasured memories in a long and rewarding lifetime. In 1978, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art decided to have a second Artist Soapbox Derby, and I built my own car for that one. I made a video about how I rebuilt my entry from 1978 to compete again. Check it out if you haven't seen it. I love making these videos, and I'm honored that you're watching. Please like, subscribe, and click the bell to be notified about new videos. I read every comment, and I do my best to answer all questions. If you like what I'm doing, please click the Patreon link and become one of the great people who help me create new videos.